The U.S. Justice Department is on the attack, slamming Google with an antitrust suit. Could they break up Google? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Google is deeply ingrained in our lives. It's all around us, you know what? I can't think of a good analogy right now. I'm going to Google that. Later, I'll Google that later. 80% of all internet searches go through Google. And YouTube, which is owned by Google, is the world's largest video sharing platform. Many of us get our news from a specially curated Google News feed that has absolutely no bias. Gmail is the most popular email platform in the world. Google's Android operating system controls many of our phones. Sure, there have been some missteps, like Google Plus and Google Glasses. Those were horrible ideas. But I'm sure their new product, Google Blood, will connect us in ways we can't even dream. But there are some crazy people out there that think Google has too much power. Namely, the entire U.S. government. Democrats and Republicans alike have found rare accord in re-examining Google and other Silicon Valley tech titans, fearing they've become too big and powerful. And now they're in a rush to delete Google before Google deletes them. Google did it to Churchill. They can do it to you, Attorney General William Barr. That's right. The Justice Department has charged Google in an antitrust lawsuit, and 11 state attorneys general joined the lawsuit too. Antitrust does not mean the government doesn't trust Google, even though that's true. Antitrust is an old-fashioned way of saying anti-monopoly, and the government says Google is a monopoly. The lawsuit comes after a year-long investigation into Google by the U.S. Justice Department. Now, since this is a Republican administration, you might think this lawsuit has to do with the fact that Google has been accused of censoring conservative videos and search results. But that is not what this antitrust lawsuit is about. Instead, the lawsuit alleges Google is unlawfully maintaining monopolies through anti-competitive and exclusionary practices in the search and search advertising markets. The government alleged that Google uses billions of dollars collected from advertisements on its platform to pay for mobile phone manufacturers, carriers, and browsers, like Apple Inc.'s Safari, to maintain Google as their preset default search engine. For example, Google paid billions of dollars to Apple to place the Google search engine as the default for iPhones. And Google's search application is preloaded and can't be deleted on mobile phones running its popular Android operating system. On top of that, Google owns or controls search distribution channels accounting for about 80% of search queries in the U.S. The government says that effectively leaves no room for competition, resulting in less choice and innovation for consumers and less competitive prices for advertisers. So the Justice Department is saying that Google is trying to maintain their monopoly over internet searches using illegal means. But does that mean the government is trying to break up Google? Will we be merely left with Ogle, which, let's be honest, is what most of you use the internet for? Well, the Justice Department did not explicitly ask a judge to break apart Google. Instead, it asked the court to consider structural relief, which theoretically could include a requirement that the company sell a portion of its business and cease other practices that federal regulators see as harmful and unlawful. But Google isn't just going to roll over, and I'll tell you why after the break. Welcome back. The U.S. Department of Justice has filed an antitrust lawsuit against Google, but don't expect results soon. Google kind of has the money to fight City Hall. Google argues that the lawsuit is deeply flawed and would do nothing to help consumers. Google claims that people use Google because they choose to, not because they're forced to or because they can't find alternatives. Wait, there are alternatives to Google? I should Google that. later. Google also argues that it doesn't have a monopoly over internet searches. They say it's unfair to compare Google with other search engines because people search for things on other websites too, like for flights on Expedia, or for news on Twitter, or for videos on YouTube. Oh wait, forget that last one. Google owns YouTube. The point is, when searching to buy something, around 60% of Americans start on Amazon. So Amazon's the real problem. Go after Jeff Bezos. But will Google's arguments work? Well, it could be a while before we find out. According to the New York Times, the lawsuit will likely outlast the Trump administration itself. The government's case against Microsoft took more than a decade to settle. Outlast Trump? Yeah, right. Trump 2050, baby! But this current lawsuit isn't the first time Google has faced an antitrust suit. Back in 2012, the Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, spent a year investigating Google before ultimately deciding not to move ahead with charges. That's because one of Google's best defenses is that they offer most of their services at little or no cost. Traditional antitrust arguments hinge on how monopolies end up price gouging the consumers, but not with Google. For most services, Google doesn't charge you. But that's because you are the product. You might be sad and alone, but hey, at least there are corporations out there that want to know everything about you. And corporations are people too. People who want to use your data to sell you stuff. But this case is bigger than just Google. It could really affect the future of all U.S. antitrust law. The Sherman Act that prohibits restraints of trade and attempted monopolization is broadly worded, leaving courts wide latitude to interpret its parameters. Because litigated antitrust cases are rare, any one ruling could affect governing precedent for future cases. This comes as governments around the world are taking a hard look at major tech companies. Over the past few years, the European Union has hit Google with a number of huge fines for manipulating search results, and antitrust violations, and more antitrust violations. In the U.S., nearly all state attorneys general are separately investigating Google, while 3 other tech giants, Facebook, Apple, and Amazon, likewise face close antitrust scrutiny. Over the summer, Democrats on a House antitrust subcommittee said Google, Apple, Amazon, and Facebook wielded monopoly power and urged their breakups. In September, Senate Republicans took aim at liability shields on online platforms like Twitter and Facebook. And that's what's amazing about Silicon Valley. It's managed to bring Democrats and Republicans together.
This lawsuit, which has been long in the making, marks a rarity in Washington. It brings together the Trump administration and progressive Democrats, but for different reasons. Liberal firebrand Senator Elizabeth Warren has called on big tech companies to be broken up for becoming so large they squash competition and limit consumer choice. Republicans, on the other hand, claim big tech companies, including Google's parent Alphabet, are biased against them and stifle the spread of conservative voices on their platforms.
And can I just say, it is nice to see Donald Trump and Elizabeth Warren working together. Though that doesn't mean the new Justice Department lawsuit is not without controversies. In February, the Justice Department's antitrust chief stepped away from the Google probe. Turns out the Assistant Attorney General had Google as a client in 2007 when he was working for a private law firm. And beyond that, within the Justice Department, there were disagreements about how to proceed on the Google antitrust suit. The reluctant staffers worried the department hadn't yet built an airtight case and feared rushing to litigation could lead to a loss in court. They also worried Mr. Barr was driven by an interest in filing a case before the election. Others were more comfortable moving ahead. And it does seem to be moving ahead. How will it turn out? Good question. Let me Google that. Chris Chappell, America Uncovered stuff.